Let's get some more insight now into Sharia law. I'm joined live by Nasser Weddady. He's an analyst specializing in the Middle East and North Africa, and he is the co-editor of the book Arab Spring Dreams: The Next Generation Speaks Out for Freedom and Justice from North Africa to Iran. Thanks so much for joining us. You grew up in Libya and Syria. You came to the United States as a refugee in 2000. So you've experienced some pretty different judicial systems. Is there any possible compromise between Sharia law and Western law?
I think that actually the prospects here is rather looking at the past 50 years since basically the wave of independences, and the responses within Muslim societies differed. You had a range of options ranging from Tunisia, which actually explicitly banned aspects that are completely in sync with Islamic law, like giving equal inheritance to women and banning polygamy, along with Turkey that followed that track, to the other extreme, which is Saudi Arabia implementing the hudud aspects of Islamic law. But what is interesting, I think the common denominator between all of these countries, as extreme as the swings are, is that actually what they share in common is that none of them really applies to full Sharia as it was understood and practiced centuries ago. Now, whether that is Sharia, Islamic law could be in sync with Western law. I think that basically an example of that was the case of Syria, which relegated the aspect of Islamic law to family law upon Muslims, and leaving the choice to the religious minorities the choice of arbitrating their disputes in front of their own communal religious courts, or going with a civil code. So there's been always this duality implemented in these legal systems. The problem is that, of course, is that when you have segments of the populations or political movements who are trying to push for the harsher aspects of that law and try to basically erase any aspects of civil law, be it Napoleonic or English common law, that inspired many of the legal codes in these countries.
I think, as was illustrated with Ryan's story, there are so many different applications of Sharia law. We kind of got into it. I mean, there's some appear to be more extreme than others. What are some of the fears about Sharia law, would you say?
I mean, the fundamental fears about Sharia law depends on your on your perspective. If you're a mainstream Muslim yourself and you believe, for example, in things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the values that are inherent, you will immediately be fearful of the prospects of Sharia law curtailing your freedom of speech, freedom of thought, even freedom of religion, your liberty to have religion or not to have it. If you're a minority, a non-Muslim minority within a Muslim majority society, your fear is that you're going to be relegated to a second-class citizenship category, because your property is protected under Islamic law, but your testimony, for example, under strict interpretation of Islamic law is going to be half that of a Muslim. If you're a woman, a Muslim woman for that matter, your fear about the strict application of Islamic jurisprudence is going to be about issues like inheritance, because women, according to classical interpretation of Islamic jurisprudence, would receive only half of what a man gets in terms of inheritance. And also the standing of a woman, the worth of the testimony of a woman will be half that of a man. So clearly in the 21st century, there are many people who are fearful of the prospects of what the application of jurisprudence means, and they're even more fearful if the application of jurisprudence is completely relegated to some of the most reactionary elements of society.
You say reactionary, and it's interesting because there are differences for women under Sharia law. Some countries ban the political participation, even education of women. But in Saudi Arabia, a country with a legal system based on Sharia law, women were recently allowed to sit on the Shura Council. So tell us about Sharia law from the perspective of women. I mean, there are extremes there as well, correct?
There are extremes. I mean, the fundamental debate is actually, to be more accurate, Islamic jurisprudence, as it's been understood in the majority of Muslim countries, never really explicitly banned women from running for political office or holding political office and participating, exercising their political rights. The debate, though, however, and this is where things get murky, is about the possibility of having Muslim women heads of states. And that debate actually, I mean, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s was not even, like the question wasn't whether Sharia allows it to happen or not, when in fact you had female prime ministers, heads of states in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and in secular Turkey. So, but the problem is that the trend that we're seeing, unfortunately, across the Muslim world is that we're having sort of a regression to the past rather than a movement forward. The gains and progresses on individual rights, no matter how theoretical they were, at least as far as the legal codes were concerned, are being now actively rolled back by reactionary elements like Islamists, Salafi groups. And in terms of the most direct application or sort of concern for women about the strict applications of Islamic law is going to be about their ability to actively participate in public life because of the strict rules of segregation, and also the fact that women ultimately will be considered as subjects to the will of their male guardians, be that their father or their husbands.
Well, thanks for the analysis, and thanks, too, for coming out in that weather in Boston, which never seems to get better. Hopefully it will. Nasser, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mike, for having me.